Joining us here, 104.5 The Team, 1045theteam.com, is Jason Minnix, at Jason Minnix on Twitter, host in San Antonio. This role for Jimmer, not guaranteed to even make the team in San Antonio. Does he have a legitimate shot?
Well, of course he's got a legitimate shot. I mean, RC and Pop were interested in the Jimmer when he was coming out of BYU. Obviously, he went much higher than where the Spurs were picking, but I know, he really does fit what they like to do in San Antonio, and it's a no-risk, high-reward situation for the San Antonio Spurs because he's not guaranteed a roster spot. It's essentially a training camp contract, partially guaranteed, but Jimmer, with his kind of game, even though his NBA career so far has been awful, with his kind of game, what he was doing in college, he could fit very nicely in San Antonio and kind of take over that Marco Bellinelli role that Belly had for the last couple of years before he signed this year with Sacramento.
Speaking of Sacramento, Jimmer starts his career with the Kings, doesn't get a lot of playing time, and look, the Kings organization is by all accounts here not a great one right now. So then he goes to Chicago late in the season 2 years ago, doesn't play a lot, and then last year doesn't really find a role at the Pelicans. But people have often thought that if he found the right situation, that he could be very successful in the NBA. How could Gregg Popovich get the best out of Jimmer Fredette?
Well, think about what Pop has done with a number of guys that are in Jimmer's situation. Look at Bruce Bowen, a journeyman playing over in Europe. His number now hangs in the rafters at the AT&T Center. Look at Danny Green right now. Danny Green got cut by Cleveland. Wasn't doing much in the NBA. Comes here and just signed a 4-year, $45 million deal. The Spurs have a history of taking guys like a Gary Neal and turning them into NBA players by coaching them up and putting them in the right situations. And you think about the way the Spurs love their ball movement, move it around, get that open three. Jimmer fits right in with that. I think I was on with you guys a couple of weeks ago after LaMarcus Aldridge was signed, and I said, the Spurs still need to find a backup guard. They did that with Ray McCollum. They needed to get another big man. They signed that 7'3" Serbian kid, and they needed an outside shooter. And there are a lot of rumors that it could be Ray Allen. Well, you know what? It could be Jimmer Fredette.
Even like a Matt Bonner comes to mind when you think of Jimmer's skill set.
Well, exactly. I mean, you take a lot of guys that you don't think would be solid NBA players. They come to San Antonio and they develop into that.
Jimmer's defense has long been questioned. How big a concern is that for the Spurs?
Well, Marco Bellinelli didn't play any defense, and he survived in San Antonio. And you think about, the Spurs do focus on defense, and that is, a stickler for Gregg Popovich. The way this defensive system is set up, and there is a lot of one-on-one defense that has to be played, but they play a lot of great help defense. And so, they're going to put guys in position, and they know what Fredette's capable of on the defensive end or not capable of, and they're going to get into sets and situations that will help try to mask some of that. So, ultimately that's not a big concern when you think about, one-on-one defense for Fredette. Yeah, he's not going to do very well. He's never been that, but that's not why he's coming in here.
We heard a lot earlier this week because of Becky Hammond about how the Spurs won the Summer League title. How much of this Spurs roster is set? How many guys is Jimmer going to be competing with some of those Summer League players for the last spots on the roster?
Well, the Spurs also, along with signing Jimmer Fredette, and, on our show yesterday afternoon, we were playing the Do the Jimmer song and all that kind of stuff, but the Spurs also signed Jonathan Simmons, who, to a guaranteed contract. He will be on the opening day roster. Simmons was the, if you call it Summer League Championship game MVP or whatever, but, Simmons is going to be on the roster. Fredette's essentially fighting for that last spot on the roster. I think they've got 14 now. They could add one more guy. But I like the situation that Jimmer is in because Jimmer's got to come and improve himself. It's not a guaranteed contract. His NBA career to this point has been nothing to write home about. Even yesterday on SportsCenter, it was an NBA journeyman, Jimmer Fredette. It was former BYU star Jimmer Fredette signs with San Antonio. And he still has that BYU legacy and folk hero type of player associated with his name. But he's got to come in here and prove it. If he's going to make the Spurs team, he's got to come in and prove it. And I got to believe that Gregg Popovich loves a hungry Jimmer Fredette that says, you've got to prove yourself if you want to be on this team. Nothing's guaranteed.
If he's fighting for that last spot, can that translate in eventually to 12, 15 minutes a game? Or is that last spot on the Spurs roster always going to be 2, 3, 5 minutes if you're lucky?
It depends on matchups, depends on situations, and keep in mind the Spurs. It's going to depend game to game, and for a guy like Jimmer Fredette, that could be a negative in the sense of shooters need rhythm, and if you miss 3 or 4 or 5 games in a row, you're not getting any rhythm. You get out there, you're a little cold. That could affect your game. But you think about San Antonio and the way Gregg Popovich manages everybody's minutes. One of the great things about the Spurs over the last several years is guys aren't playing 35, 38 minutes a game on average. They're under 30 because of the older players and a Tim Duncan, a Tony Parker, a Manu Ginobili, even a Boris Diaw type. Pop manages minutes, so minutes are going to be there if he goes out and he earns them. And the Spurs have always been able to maintain a deep roster, and they use everybody on their roster. Playoff time comes, you see some teams only rolling 2-3 deep in their bench. Playoffs come and the Spurs rotations look like they do in December. They don't have to, shorten their bench any.
Glens Falls native Jimmer Fredette signing a training camp deal with the San Antonio Spurs. Jason Minnix of ESPN out in San Antonio, thanks for joining us today.
Appreciate it. Anytime, guys.